You've changed. People who knew you 5 years ago would probably notice it. But you still feel like you. And that's not humility. That's not modesty. That's your brain working exactly as designed. And it might be the most quietly damaging thing it does. Think about the last time someone told you how much you'd grown. Maybe a friend said it, maybe a parent. And your immediate reaction before the gratitude, before the smile was probably something like, have I, though? Because from the inside, you feel continuous. You feel like the same person who made all the same mistakes, carried all the same weight, wanted all the same things. The version of you that existed 5 years ago doesn't feel like a different person. It feels like a slightly worse draft of right now. That gap between who you actually are and who you perceive yourself to be has a name. Psychologists call it the identity continuity illusion. And it's not a flaw in your thinking, it's a feature of your neurology. Here's what's actually happening. Deep in your brain, there's a network that activates specifically when you're not focused on anything in particular. When you're daydreaming, when you're replaying a conversation, when you're lying in bed at night thinking about something you said 3 years ago. Neuroscientists call this the default mode network, and one of its primary functions is constructing and maintaining your sense of self. Every time you recall a memory, every time you imagine your future, every time you make a decision and ask yourself, what kind of person does this make me? That network is running in the background, stitching together a coherent story of who you are. The problem is that coherence comes at a cost. Your brain is not a camera. It doesn't record your life and play it back accurately. It's more like a novelist who already knows how the story ends. Every new experience you have, every shift in your beliefs, every time you act differently than you would have before, your brain runs it through a filter. And that filter is built from every story you've ever told yourself about who you are. The shy kid, the one who always self-sabotages, the person who means well but never follows through. Those narratives don't disappear when they stop being accurate. They become the lens through which new information gets interpreted. This is narrative identity theory, the idea that your sense of self isn't a collection of facts about you. It's a story. And like any good story, it needs to stay internally consistent. So when you change genuinely, measurably change, your brain doesn't announce it. It absorbs the change into the existing narrative so quietly that you barely notice it happened. You quit the habit. You set the boundary. You had the conversation you've been avoiding for months. And then almost immediately, your brain files it away under what you do now instead of how far you've come. The growth becomes invisible because the brain's job isn't to track your progress. Its job is to make sure you still feel like you. And here's the part that almost feels compassionate when you understand it. Your brain isn't doing this to sabotage you. It's doing it because continuity feels safe. A self that changes too visibly, too suddenly, is a self that becomes unpredictable, and the brain treats unpredictability like a threat, so it smooths the edges. It blends the before and after into one seamless, stable you. The architect of your identity is working overtime to make sure you never feel the disorientation of becoming someone new. But what does that cost? It costs you motivation, because when you can't see your progress, forward movement feels abstract. You've been doing the work and nothing feels different, so your brain starts asking why you're still doing it. It costs you self-compassion, because when you judge yourself, you're judging against a self that hasn't updated. You're holding yourself to the standard of who you were when you were at your worst, without crediting yourself for the distance you've actually traveled. And most quietly, most expensively, it costs you the ability to trust your own transformation. You start treating your growth as theoretical. Maybe I've changed. Other people seem to think so. But from the inside, the evidence never feels quite convincing enough. Here's the reframe. The fact that you still feel like you is not evidence that you haven't changed. It's evidence that you've integrated the change so completely that it's become structural. You don't feel different the way you don't feel your own heartbeat, not because it's not there, but because it's become the baseline. The new version of you isn't performing an upgrade. It's just running. Stop asking yourself if you feel like you've changed. That question has a built-in flaw. Ask instead, what would I have done a year ago in this situation? And what am I doing now? That gap is the growth. It won't feel dramatic. It won't feel like a transformation. It'll feel like the most obvious choice in the world. That's how you know it worked. Your brain will never give you the documentary version of your own becoming. It doesn't do montages. It doesn't pause on the before and after. It just keeps moving quietly, competently, making the new you feel inevitable. And maybe that's not something to fix. Maybe the goal isn't to feel your change more intensely. Maybe it's to stop mistaking the silence for stagnation. You are not standing still. You just stop noticing the motion. And that only happens when you've been moving long enough for it to feel like home.